I used to think my father didn't love me, and that belief stayed with me longer than he ever did. My name is Albert. I'm 79 years old, and only now, at this late hour in my life, do I feel like I'm beginning to understand the silence that shaped me. For most of my childhood, love felt like something that happened in other homes. I would see it in small ways when I visited friends. A hand on the shoulder, a kind word, a father calling his son Beta with softness in his voice. In my house, things were different. My father was a man of few words, and the ones he chose were always practical. Eat your food. Finish your work. Don't waste time. I cannot remember a single moment when he said he was proud of me, and I know for certain he never said he loved me. As a boy, I tried to earn it. I studied hard, kept my clothes clean, did what I was told without complaint. I would watch him closely, searching his face for some sign that I was enough. Sometimes, after I brought home good marks, he would nod slightly and say, That nod became everything to me. I held on to it like it was proof that I mattered. But as I grew older, that silence began to feel heavier. It turned into a quiet resentment I carried into my teenage years. I remember once, I must have been around 16, standing in the doorway while he sat on the charpai reading the newspaper. I had just received news that I was accepted into a good college. My heart was racing, not just with excitement but with hope. I told him, waiting for something more than a nod. He lowered the paper, looked at me for a second, and said, "That's what you're supposed to do." Then he went back to reading. Something inside me closed that day. I stopped trying to impress him. I told myself I didn't need his approval, but the truth is, I needed it more than ever. I just didn't know how to ask for it anymore. When I became a man myself, I promised I would be different. I told my children I loved them every chance I got. I hugged them, praised them, tried to be the father I wished I had. And yet there were moments when I caught myself becoming quiet, distant, especially when life grew difficult. It frightened me how easily I could slip into that same silence. My father never explained himself. In fact, we never had a real conversation about feelings. Not once. Even when he grew older and his body began to weaken, his words did not change. When he fell sick in his final year, I visited him often. I would sit beside his bed, watching the man who had once seemed so strong now struggle to lift a glass of water. One afternoon, I remember adjusting his blanket. His hands were rough, the same hands that had worked for decades without rest. As I tucked the blanket around him, he looked at me, longer than usual. There was something in his eyes I couldn't quite place. I waited, hoping maybe this time he would say something different. But he only cleared his throat and said, "You came early today." I nodded and forced a small smile. Yes, I had time. That was the closest we ever came to anything resembling tenderness. After he passed, I carried a quiet anger with me. Not loud, not obvious, but always there. At his funeral, as people spoke about his discipline, his sacrifices, his honesty, I listened, but I felt separate from it all. They were describing a man I knew, but not the father I longed for. Years went by and life continued in its usual way. My children grew up, started families of their own. I became a grandfather. Time softened many things, but that question remained with me. Why couldn't he just say it? It wasn't until recently, sitting alone one evening, that something shifted. I had been going through old belongings, things that had been packed away for years. Among them was a small metal box that once belonged to my father. Inside there were a few documents, some old receipts, and a folded piece of paper I had never seen before. It was a letter, written in his handwriting, not addressed to anyone, just words on a page. I hesitated before opening it, as if I was about to step into something I wasn't prepared for. The letter wasn't long. It spoke about his early life, about growing up in a home where his own father was even stricter, even colder. He wrote about leaving school early to work, about responsibilities that came too soon. And then there was a line that made my hands tremble. He wrote, "I don't know how to speak softly. It was never spoken to me." I read that line again and again. In that moment, something inside me began to loosen. For the first time, I saw my father not just as the man who raised me, but as a boy who had never been shown how to express love, a boy who learned that providing was love, that discipline was care, that silence was strength. I realized that all those years I had been waiting for him to give me something he himself had never received. And then I thought about the small things I had overlooked, the way he made sure there was always food on the table, even when money was tight, the nights he stayed awake when I was sick, even if he never said a comforting word, the fact that he worked his entire life without complaint so that I could have opportunities he never did. That nod I used to cling to as a child, maybe that was his way of saying everything he didn't have the words for. At 79, it feels strange to be learning something so simple and yet so heavy. I spent decades measuring love by words, by expressions I could recognize. But my father spoke a different language, one I never tried to understand until it was too late to ask him about it. If I could sit with him now, I don't think I would ask him why he never said "I love you." I think I would tell him that I finally understand, that I see him more clearly now than I ever did when he was alive. And maybe, just maybe, I would thank him for loving me in the only way he knew how. If you're listening to me right now, and there is someone in your life whose silence has hurt you, I won't tell you to forget it. That pain is real. But I will say this, sometimes what feels like absence is simply a different kind of presence, one we don't recognize until we're willing to look a little deeper. It took me 79 years to see my father's love. I only wish it hadn't taken me so long.